Hello and thank you again for joining us for another episode of Kidnapped Hearts, the weekly TV show brought to you by the International Criminal Court against child kidnapping. We are committed to bringing you the ugly truth about the corrupted family court systems and heinous crimes against children, which the government continues to turn a blind eye to. In many of our recent campaigns, we've been petitioning President Trump to address the issue of parental abduction and the plight of left-behind parents. If you've not already read up on our campaigns, then we strongly recommend that you do. These can be found on our website under the News tab. This week, we'll be talking about what happens when children are abducted to countries that have not signed the Hague Convention. It's a scary and daunting prospect, and we work with parents all the time who face the horrible challenge of having to recover their missing child. So if anyone is facing this current predicament, or knows anyone who is, then it's really important that you pay attention to this episode. But before we go any further, as a disclaimer, we must stress that this episode is not about breaking the law or doing anything illegal. And even though not all officials are crooked, that doesn't mean that you should let your guard down. Nor are we lambasting the foster parents who open their homes to these children, as a lot of them are good people. Furthermore, whatever we say here should also not be viewed as legal advice. If in doubt, it's always recommended to speak to your lawyer. And if you do need legal help, you're welcome to contact our office, where we can give you further advice. For some of you who are not up to speed with the Hague Convention, you may in fact be asking, what is the Hague Convention? The Hague Convention on the Civil Aspects of International Child Abduction, or Hague Abduction Convention, is a multilateral treaty developed by the Hague Conference on Private International Law, HCCH, that provides an expeditious method to return a child internationally abducted by a parent from one member country to another. The convention was concluded 25th October 1980 and entered into force between the signatories on 1st December 1983. The convention was drafted to ensure the prompt return of children who have been abducted from their country of habitual residence or wrongfully retained in a contracting state not their country of habitual residence. The primary intention of the convention is to preserve whatever status quo child custody arrangement existed immediately before an alleged wrongful removal or retention, thereby deterring a parent from crossing international boundaries in search of a more sympathetic court. The convention applies only to children under the age of 16. As of May 2017, 97 states are party to the convention. In 2016, Philippines and Pakistan acceded to the convention. The convention does not alter any substantive rights. The convention requires that a court in which a Hague Convention action is filed should not consider the merits of any underlying child custody dispute, but should determine only that country in which those issues should be heard. Return of the child is to the member country rather than specifically to the left-behind parent. The convention requires the return of a child who is a habitual resident in a contracting party immediately before an action that constitutes a breach of custody or access rights. The convention provides that all contracting states, as well as any judicial and administrative bodies of those contracting states, shall act expeditiously in all proceedings seeking the return of a child, and that those institutions shall use the most expeditious procedures available to the end that final decision be made within 6 weeks from the date of commencement of the proceedings. The convention provides that the removal or retention of a child is wrongful whenever a. It is in breach of rights of custody attributed to a person, an institution, or any other body, either jointly or alone, under the law of the state in which the child was habitually resident immediately before the removal or retention, and b. At the time of removal or retention, those rights were actually exercised, either jointly or alone, or would have been so exercised but for the removal or retention. These rights of custody may arise by operation of law or by reason of a judicial or administrative decision, or by reason of an agreement having legal effect under the law of the country of habitual residence. From the convention standpoint, the removal of a child by one of the joint holders without the consent of the other is wrongful, and this wrongfulness derives in this particular case not from some action in breach of a particular law, but from the fact that such action had disregarded the rights of the other parent, which are also protected by law, and has interfered with their normal exercise. We strongly advise you to familiarise yourself with which countries are signed up to The Hague and which ones are not, especially if you're a parent who is either split up or on the verge of splitting up with a partner from a different country. We know how daunting it can seem when you may find yourself thinking along these lines when a relationship ends. But at the same time, educating yourself in this way may help you far more than you may realise in the long run. The unpleasant reality is that more and more children are being kidnapped. In fact, as shocking as it may seem, family members commit the majority of child abductions. I know that may sound hard to believe, but sadly, it's a fact. The National Centre for Missing and Exploited Children, NCMEC, reports that more than 200,000 children are abducted by family members each year, while only 115 reported child abductions were committed by strangers. And according to the FBI, there are over 1,200 new cases of parental kidnapping every year. But before we go any further, let's just talk a little more about parental abduction and what exactly it is. This is where one parent violates any court order regarding the custody of their child by moving with the child to a different place or country, without the consent or knowledge of the left behind parent. In the United States, abduction by unscrupulous parents can occur within the country itself, meaning the parent can simply flee from one state to another. Or it can occur if the parent moves abroad with the child. Either way, it is categorically wrong on so many levels, not to mention extremely selfish, as the best interest of the child is not always being considered. In situations where the child is taken to a country that has signed up to the Hague Convention, according to the treaty's guidelines, the child is supposed to be returned quickly and efficiently to their natural residence. But we're not going to lie to you. The Hague Convention is not completely without its challenges, and yes, we do know there are cases, even right here in the US, where children are being illegally detained despite the country having ratified the Hague Convention. We work with parents and are fighting such cases almost daily. So, by no means are we saying that the Hague Convention is perfect and foolproof. But today, we want to focus on what happens when children are removed and taken to non-Hague countries. Because this is a really tricky territory and where serious problems can start occurring. And for left behind parents, this is where their nightmares start to begin. Sharon Cook, Advice Line Manager for the British organisation Reunite International Child Abduction Centre, explained the warning signs to keep an eye on for anyone concerned about parental kidnapping. The most obvious warning sign is a breakdown in a relationship, but other signs may include a sudden interest in getting a passport or copy birth certificate for the child, a parent expressing a wish to holiday alone with a child, a change in circumstances such as leaving employment or redundancy, selling a house or giving up tenancy. There may also be a sudden change in contact arrangements or constant difficulty in being able to see the child. For many people, the issue of parental child abduction is something with which they may not have had direct personal contact. There's often a perception, fueled by a number of high-profile cases, that it's about fathers abducting their children. However, statistics show it is mainly mothers, either intentionally or unintentionally. The latest figures show just how widespread this problem has become. Our statistics for January to May 2011 show a 21% increase in the number of abductions to non-Hague states compared to the same period last year. We have also seen a 21% increase in the number of parents requesting advice on prevention of abduction. This demonstrates there is a need for information on preventative steps that a parent can take, and it is essential that we continue to raise awareness of parental child abduction. After all, it could happen to anyone. The psychological impact on children can be traumatic, and for the left behind parent, the shock and loss are unbearable, particularly if they don't know where their child is. Even after they have been found, the fear and pain of not knowing if they will return home is unimaginable. Yes, sadly, these awful and selfish acts have the biggest effects on these vulnerable children. And when children get smuggled into non-Hague countries, it's a whole different ballgame. The BBC reported on two parents' stories of having their child abducted to non-Hague countries. The first was Safraz Khan, whose daughter was taken to Pakistan, one of the most common non-Hague destinations to take a child, along with India, Somalia, Nigeria and Egypt. His daughter Amina was kidnapped by her mother 4 years ago. He has travelled to Pakistan 5 times to look for his daughter because there are records of her and her mother entering the country, but he still has no idea where she is. He says he feels totally helpless. All he has is a court order demanding Amina's mother and her family members bring her back or provide information. He says the courts and the police expect him as the parent to go to Pakistan, find his child, and then let them know. When we met him at his house in South London, he takes us up to her bedroom where her school uniform is still laid out on the bed, alongside teddies and schoolwork, just as they were the day she went missing. It's something of a shrine to his daughter, awaiting the day she comes home that Safraz so desperately hopes will come. When she does, I want her to know I've never stopped thinking about her. The strain this is putting on Safraz is plain. The loss that I'm facing is like bereavement. I don't have a grave, God forbid, but I don't have anything. In 4 years, I've heard nothing. Nothing. Safraz is left waiting, worried his daughter will forget who he is. He has remarried and had 2 more children, but says it's harder to bond with them because of the loss of Amina. But he feels as a father he's not got the sympathy a mum may have got in the same situation. There is a perception that it's largely fathers who abduct their own children, but according to Reunite, 70% of parents who carry out the abductions are mothers. The other father who was interviewed had a different experience. In his case, he was one of the fortunate ones to have had his child returned to him. Yet the reunion would sadly be bittersweet and act as a sombre and abysmal reminder of the long-term damage that still remains even after the children are returned. In some cases, these children do come home, but the experience leaves a mark. We noticed the CCTV as soon as we arrived at the home of Mohammed Sheikh in Leicester, mostly because the same cameras were at Safraz's house. Mohammed is another father whose child has been abducted. Inside, his 11-year-old son Ramiz plays on his computer and his dad delivers him a milkshake and breakfast as he competes with a friend on Call of Duty. Mohammed dotes on his son. He lives in constant fear of him being taken away again. The moment his mum arrives to pick him up or drop him off, I'm watching on the cameras. Every time he's with her, I worry, and I always will. Ramiz was kidnapped by his mother, Mohammed's ex-wife, and taken to the United Arab Emirates when he was 5. Because the country is not signed up to the Hague Convention, there is no system in place to locate Ramiz and get him back. Sitting at the kitchen table, piles of court documents in front of him, Mohammed explains how he started his own search. I used any means possible. I sent an email to his mum, and there's a way of tracing an email. It's not illegal, so that's what I did. I got an IP address for somewhere in Sharjah in the UAE, so I contacted my cousin in Dubai. He went over, located them, and followed them home. Mohammed now has full custody of his son, but the boy still sees his mother. Mohammed says he doesn't want Ramiz to ever resent him for keeping him away from her, so they have limited contact. But Ramiz is scared of going on trips with her in case she takes him away again. He takes a friend if they do, because she can't take us both. Of course, it goes without saying that there needs to be a better system in place for these countries that have not signed the convention. Not only to safeguard the rights of the left behind parents, but even more so for the rights of the child, who will no doubt be traumatised after being torn away from his or her family home and taken to somewhere completely new. Sometimes they're dragged to places where the culture and language is alien to them in every sense, making these young, scared and vulnerable children feel even more isolated and in despair. A scholarly essay written in the Northwest Journal of the International Human Rights investigated further the serious effect that being exposed to these situations has on these children. International child abduction by a parent is a crime that very frequently goes unpunished and unchecked, and can destroy the abducted child's sense of security, well-being and happiness. These abductions arise out of a variety of circumstances, but they often involve clashes of cultural, religious and social norms, particularly when the parents are of different nationalities or religions. When cultures clash, the legal ramifications are serious, and seriously difficult to navigate. When a child is abducted across international borders, the countries and parties involved often have to protect the left-behind parent and the child, both of whom have little recourse under present international law. Nowhere else is this clash of cultural and legal norms as evident as in the cases of international child abduction, where the abducting parent is a Muslim father under Islamic law. Such abductions escape the current reach of international law on child abduction, and subsequently give rise to a difficult and therefore legally unresolvable situation. Of the 904 known unresolved cases of international parental child abduction to the US government, approximately 25% involve countries under whose legal systems family law is governed by Sharia. Few solutions to the problem of these specific abductions have been proposed, and the result is a gaping hole in the prosecution of international child abduction and protection of children's rights. Now, here's where it gets really complicated, because Sharia law is, of course, recognised in many Muslim countries, but it also has some very different views when it comes to the child. Generally speaking, it's extremely rare for custody of children to be given to any non-Muslim mother. And even if she was Muslim, oftentimes the custody would not be granted to her unless she is living in a Muslim country or if the father himself is a non-Muslim. However, if a mother is living in a Muslim country where she does have custody, it is in fact the father who will have legal custody, and therefore he has the right to decide where the child can live. And if you delve a little bit further, you'll discover that the court even has the authority to completely give full custody to the father, if it was determined that the mother was not raising the child in accordance to Islamic standards. The mother is also in danger of losing custody of her children if she marries a non-Muslim, or decides to live in a home without her relatives. Care of a child which falls within the infancy stage is called hadana. Under Islamic law, the mother is usually favoured for custody at this stage, although it is possible for a father to obtain custody as well. Depending on the school of Islam, the temporal period of custody may run as short as 2 years of age for boys, or as long as up to the age of marriage for girls. Guardianship of education and property are exclusively the domain of the father or other male relatives. In order to be awarded custody, the parent must show that they are mentally able to care for the child as well as capable of safeguarding the child's interests. Herein lies the crux of Islamic custody law. What are the child's interests? A child born to a Muslim parent, mother or father, is, under Sharia, a Muslim. A Muslim father, as the guardian of the child's education, has a legal obligation to the best interest of the child, which frequently corresponds with an upbringing under the Sharia. This religiously based best interest standard has pointed ramifications in abduction and custody cases involving Muslim fathers and non-Muslim mothers. It is often the issue upon which abduction and custody disputes within the Islamic legal system turn. Muslim countries determine the best interest of the child according to religious and social values, and this typically leads their courts to conclude that it falls within the best interest of the child to have the child raised in the Islamic nation or in its respective culture. These cultural biases and laws in Islamic countries raise obstacles to non-Muslim, foreign parents. It would therefore be rare that a court in a Muslim-majority country relying on Sharia for matters of family law would award custody or demand the return of a child to a non-Muslim mother over a Muslim father in a Muslim-majority country if the legal definition of the child's interest is to be raised as a Muslim. According to the Sharia, a child is considered to be Muslim regardless of which parent, mother or father, is Muslim, and the child must be raised as a Muslim. By a parent or a court outside of an Islamic state, however, the child may be viewed as a non-Muslim or a half-Muslim, and therefore as having the right to be raised in the non-Muslim parent's culture or religion. This is of course in direct conflict with Sharia, and as a Muslim-majority country basing its legal system on Sharia would therefore never sign to a convention, such as the Hague Convention, that might result in an outcome which is against Islamic law. Since they're concerned with human rights, conventions, including Inter Alia, the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women, Women's Convention, implicitly require that states parties impact both extra-governmental, provide conduct, as well as public law in signatory states. As mentioned earlier, Sharia seeks to maintain a division between private and public categories of law, and while many Islamic nations will adopt secular Western norms in the realm of public law, they will continue to follow the Sharia in matters of personal status or private law. While both public and private law reform has occurred in Muslim-majority countries, private law reform has often been weak and difficult to enforce, particularly when it relates to women and children's rights. Therefore, as argued similarly by Bharati Venkatraman, when Sharia is in contradiction with Human Rights Convention provisions, it is extremely difficult for an Islamic nation to find a way to uphold such provisions absent the taking of reservations, which often flout the rights the convention seeks to ensure. But of course, it's not simply a battle against Sharia law. This is a problem that continues to persist and exist in many other non-Hague countries, and yes, we're sad to also say it is even happening in Hague countries. But what can you do about it? A lot of times, these situations can arise because a deceitful parent has taken the child under the pretense of a holiday to a country that has not signed The Hague, with the sole intention to abduct the child. The real problem starts to occur because these countries are not under any obligation whatsoever to see that the child is returned to their usual home. Let's not also forget that the parent who did the abducting may not face any repercussions, and the law in their country may even work in their favour. What makes the matter even more frustrating is a lot of those within the legal system, or even the authorities, are not always well trained in these cases and situations. Some of the law enforcers have even been known to be deceitful, crooked, and accept bribes. So, where does this leave the left behind parent and child then? Of course, prevention is better than cure. If you're currently facing a concern that your ex-partner is in danger of fleeing with your child, it's highly recommended that you take steps to safeguard yourself and your child sooner rather than later. One of the ways you can do this is to obtain a specific court order which prohibits the other parent from leaving the country with the child. Courts have the authority to ban parents from going abroad with the child if it's deemed that it would not be safe for the child. If anyone was affected by this episode today, or if you are or know someone who is a left behind parent, please feel free to contact our offices to find out more about how we can help you or offer advice and further support. Our team has a wealth of experience and expertise in this area and deal with cases like this on a daily basis. I encourage you to share this video with your friends and family. This is something that can affect parents and children everywhere, and we need to join in standing up against these injustices and to raise awareness. That's all we have time for today on our show. Thank you for joining us again for another episode of Kidnapped Hearts. Tell us what you think on our Facebook page at facebook.com/childabductioncourt.org or on our Twitter page at childabductionc. You can also drop us a line at our website, childabductioncourt.eu, or in the comments section below this video. Be sure to tune in next week for another hard-hitting episode with nothing but the facts.